So this week we have a special guest, Tony Moffatt, who's going to join me in a further discussion about the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and we hope you enjoy it. And welcome back to Mishmash Men. It's been a while, and I am excited to be back in studio recording another episode of Mishmash Men. If you haven't noticed, I'm sitting in a different seat than I normally sit in. I'm sitting in the seat that normally is occupied by my partner in crime, Dusty. He's been overwhelmed with work, and he's got a new baby, so he's got a lot going on. But I contacted a former guest and a very good friend of mine, longtime friend, Mr. Tony Moffatt, and to my immediate left, sitting in my normal seat.
I will be here impersonating a guest host today.
There we go.
That'll be awesome.
So I know we had kind of laid out what we're going to talk about today, but just to clue the listener in, the last episode that we recorded and played was the episode I did on the Constitution and the role of the Bill of Rights. And it got a lot of attention, which is great. I got a lot of feedback and questions like, hey, what did you mean by this? And some challenges, and I thought it would be good to rehash some of that. It might make up a two-parter that we just bifurcate and then play the second half down the road. We'll just see how it goes with Tony. Tony and I commonly get together and talk about a number of topics. Usually it's work-related, but sometimes it's some stuff like this. So this could be a good conversation, so I hope you enjoy. So without further ado, I'm just going to give a rehash of that episode, and you can please go back and take a listen if you want. But what I talked about was coming out of the Revolution, the American Revolution, the one in 1776-ish, and then there was a Articles of Confederation government that was implemented. Everyone saw that was kind of a bad deal. They weren't able to raise taxes. The government was weak. It was just 13 independent colonies or now states that were kind of running around, and they weren't able to pay off debt from the war. So the individual legislatures sent their representatives, presumably or ostensibly, to rehash or refit those Articles of Confederation to fix what ailed them. And instead of doing that, they basically instituted a new form of government, the Constitution. So now we had a true republic governed by a written constitution, which is fairly rare and still remains so. And then during that discussion of the Constitution, and again, the Constitution, it assumes that our freedoms, our rights are a puzzle piece, and then we're going to take this one little corner, and that's going to be the federal government role. Everything else belongs to us. And so the argument that Alexander Hamilton made in the Federalist Papers, thank you very much, number 84, under the pseudonym Publius, said, hey, the rights belong to the people. Why do we have to list those? Because, the Magna Carta assumes that the king gives rights. So we're going to carve out some rights for us, and everything else belongs to the king. If we go down this path, like the New York Constitution didn't have rights listed, if you go down that path, people could get confused, and rightly so. So I wouldn't say I'm strongly behind this position, but right now as a thought experiment, I like the idea of considering this, that the Bill of Rights, there were like 39 that were put forth. They got pared down and voted on, and now the 10 were the ones that remained. I read through them last week. You can listen to it, or last episode. But now what we have, I would argue, is the very thing the Anti-Federalists, led by most prominently Patrick Henry, who said this federal government's too big and too strong. You need to have a list of rights. Well, the very instrument that became the Bill of Rights is now the thing that people say, well, those are our rights. When you look at like the Soviet Constitution, which was a list of rights, everything else belongs to the state. Well, it looks like they have more rights than we do. And people get confused today. They think, well, the Second Amendment says that I can carry a gun. No. The Constitution in the Second Amendment recognizes your right to arm yourself to protect you from a tyrannical government, not so you can go hunt. So that's my argument, that the rights that people get confused, the rights come from the government, rights come from God. That's my position. And so here we are. So that's a quick summary, but let's dig into it. Thoughts?
Well, I decided I listened just today to your last episode, and I thought you did a terrific job in laying out that case, but I decided to take you up on your thought experiment. And so I listened to it knowing that I was going to do this with a view to, well, what if I was on the other side? Or what if I was somebody who wanted to be very skeptical and have questions for you, Mr. Mauser, constructor of the Bill of Rights, defender of the Bill of Rights, or actually not defender of the Bill of Rights, but attacker of the Bill of Rights. If I
That's pretty bold.
Maybe too bold. Let's see.
How about disliker of the idea of the Bill of Rights?
Disliker of the. Yeah. I'm willing.
Not of rights in general, but just writing them down.
I am willing to concede that to you, but I have some questions, and
absolutely.
So I'm delighted that you brought up the Second Amendment and the other things there, because I have some questions on those. But really, what I wanted to do is just sort of like, in some cases, maybe take the other side. I'm not nearly as well studied on this as you are. I'm familiar with, of course, the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalists and general history that you were talking about. As a matter of fact, I was laughing to myself because, when I was a child in school, I had to memorize the preamble to the Constitution, and I still remember it. And so as you were reading it, I was listening closely to that to make sure that you got it correct, and you did.
Yeah.
So congratulations on that.
I appreciate that.
It's hard when you get a microphone in front of you to be accurate.
Very hard. Very hard.
Indeed. So anyway, I brought a little list of questions, and so I thought I would throw them at you. And for the listeners, you have not been pre-briefed on any of this.
I haven't. You even offered, and I said, let's do it extemporaneously. Yeah.
So I think this will be fun.
Yeah.
So how do you want me to do it? You want me to just go?
Yeah, ask a question, and then I'll give what I think is the answer, and then let's discuss and just kind of run it to ground.
Sounds good.
Because, again, I'm a disliker of listing the rights, not a disliker of the rights. There were some folks that made comments. They might not have listened to the whole episode, but they assumed that I was saying we don't want rights.
Right.
That's not the case at all.
So. Yeah. So I thought it was very interesting. I want to get your thoughts on this in general. Let's try and get into the minds of the framers. And so the first thing that I have is, as I was listening and I was sort of reciting back the preamble to the Constitution, it says, in order to form a more perfect union, as you go along with the people, in order to form a more perfect union. And it occurred to me that those could actually be the most important words in the preamble. And I wondered about that all of a sudden while listening to the episode. I wonder if the framers of the Constitution, because they were coming along, you said it just a minute ago that we were under Articles of Confederation, and they were rewriting essentially the Articles of Confederation in order to form a more perfect union. Do you think that perhaps the framers never intended for that to be enshrined as a sort of like permanent, all-knowing, all-bearing document, but that perhaps it would be revised in the same way that they were revising the Articles of Confederation as they went along in history and learned new things, that maybe indeed, and far be it from me to quote Barack Obama, but that the document would actually be a living document, since they were actually in the process of revising the document for that very purpose?
That's a great question, and I appreciate that. That's a good question for discussion. So first, by way of history, a little bit, like I mentioned before, the legislature sent their representatives to, I think it was still Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, I believe, yeah.
Sent them there to revise the Articles of Confederation. And Madison, in sort of a soft coup,
hijacked the proceedings.
He did. He hijacked the proceedings and says, look, We cannot continue to revise these. What we need is to start with a clean sheet of paper, and in order to form a more perfect union, establish the Constitution. So the first part of it is, and I'll get to the second part shortly, but the Constitution was not a revision of the Articles of Confederation. It supplanted it. It removed it. We're going to do this. And when they voted on it, when they ratified the Constitution, each one of the states, that's what they were submitting to. Like, okay, well, we're going to throw out the old, and we're going to have this new one. That's going to be our framework of government. And part of that was the writings that made up the Federalist Papers, and that back and forth between, in general, the two schools of thought, which was we don't need a strong federal government because they will run roughshod over the states and the people. They wanted to avoid that. So just a little bit of background on that. And the other part of it is they absolutely wanted the Constitution, from the Constitution on, not Articles of Confederation, to be amendable. And they did that. Like, that was the discussion during the ratification process. Is, well, we have to be able to amend this, and we're going to amend it with these list of rights and these other writings that we're going to discuss. Trying to codify in writing the constraints that we're placing on the federal government. So I don't know if that answers your question, but what are your thoughts about what I said?
Well, I believe that you're correct. They made it amendable, but it gives me some pause to wonder whether people who were establishing government at that day. Remember, we're talking about the era of sailing ships, right at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It really hadn't caught on around most of the world at that point. It was still being hatched in England at the time, and so they were right at the very beginning of the era that we have come out of recently in the information era. And so I wonder if they could even conceive of, making these rules, and then that would catalyze into a nation of 330 million people, coast to coast. It was not a coast to coast; it was coast to Appalachian Mountains, right, basically at that point.
Coast to wilderness, maybe.
Yeah, coast to wilderness. At that point, it was still basically a coastal country, and so I wonder if they could conceive of, and if they themselves might say, well, you've got a much larger problem on your hands now. Perhaps what we have done is no longer, so the amendability, for instance, in a nation that large with 50 states as opposed to 13, are those still workable rules for amendment purposes? That sort of thing. It brings to mind. I just wonder if they themselves might say, well, it might take another look.
That's a good question. And so to bring in some of these other things, and I hinted at maybe a discussion about the progressive era is in order.
Absolutely.
And we're going to dabble in it right now because there were a number.
Can we talk bad about Woodrow Wilson?
100%. Yeah.
Wait, if I'm following the thought exercise, I have to talk well about Woodrow Wilson. Is that true?
Good luck. So that progressive era produced the Federal Reserve, which is a central bank that drives all of our decision making that we have in our nation today. I'm going to do a different podcast on the Federal Reserve for sure, but and
that's not even a question, by the way. You say it as if some people don't think that it's a central bank. In the financial literature, in the common speak, and everything, it is referred to as a central bank.
It is exactly. I think if you ask the average guy walking down the street, what do they think about a central bank? One, they probably don't even know what that means. The implications of a central bank mean. But let's just say they are read enough to know that, central banks, that's some of these other countries have central banks. They might not understand that Andrew Jackson successfully defended us and got rid of a central bank, which came back to us in the form of the 1913 legislation that was passed that formed the Federal Reserve. So you have the income tax, which came around the same time, which was a temporary measure.
Voluntary as well.
Yeah, voluntary, and it was temporary. Mm-hmm. There is nothing as permanent as a temporary government program. I'll quote Milton Friedman, one of my favorite economists.
Absolutely.
And this is a key amendment to the Constitution that really wrecked federalism. Besides the whole taxing thing and the Federal Reserve. And that's a direct election of senators.
Senators, popular vote.
Yeah, it completely changed the dynamic. So in the past, the state legislatures elected or selected, depending on how they cut it, their own representatives, the senators, that were now 2 for every state, that filtered a lot of garbage that was otherwise dreamt up in the House. So the House is everyone, you vote for your representative. Ours is Dale Strong in this area. And let's say we convince Dale Strong that we want everybody to be supplied with, by the federal government or by the state, purple sweaters. That's my famous.
Totally on board with your purple sweaters. Nobody should be allowed to wear one.
So we want them to buy them.
Oh, do we? Okay.
Yeah, we want everyone equipped with 2 purple sweaters.
Okay, awesome.
Everyone. So somebody's got to pay for it. We don't care, but the government.
What I meant to say was purple sweaters are awesome, and everybody ought to have 2.
So then, but then that legislation that let's say he gets enough sponsors for it, Dale Strong does, and then it goes to a vote, and the House passes it because some of their people want purple sweaters. But then it would get to the Senate, and the Senate's like, well, how are we going to pay for this? Because the state legislatures are the ones that now drive the decisions for those 2 senators. And they have to consider, those 2 senators have to consider what the legislature and their constituency think about the matter. And it filtered a lot of these, the volatility of direct election. Well, now everyone, we elect our own senators. And then so now the senators, they kowtow to the voters. And if the voters want the purple sweaters, then now we're going to, so then you see debt just shoot up since that time. So that progressive era produced, those are 2 of the most disgusting ones. But it completely changed the dynamic, different than what the founders envisioned.
Right.
So my argument would be, if we were more diligent in protecting, we as a people throughout time, protecting the construct of the government as it was, then we'd be in better shape than we are now. And if we would educate ourselves also on where rights come from, and what the role of the government is, I think we'd be in better shape. That's in general my argument. But
I tend to agree with that. And even to go back and say what you just said, but maybe in some slightly different terminology, is that the way the Senate was constructed so that it was a representative of the states themselves, you could look at it that way, was sort of a shock absorber against, to put it in current parlance, against populism, against democracy. We don't live in a democracy.
Right.
We use democratic means to elect some of our leaders and that sort of thing, get people involved in the government, but we are not strictly in a democracy. Those tend to degenerate into mob rules and, all kinds of bad things. And so the Senate original construct was very much intended to be a shock absorber against that. It was very much intended to be a something to just apply some brake power to sort of runaway populism, runaway democracy, if you will. I might get shot for using that kind of terminology because so many people believe that we live in a democracy.
Yeah, and the people that cry out most about it
are the progressives.
They're progressives, and did you remember in my my discussion last episode? The purpose of a system is what it does. Posywid.
I love it. Yeah, absolutely.
So the same folks that decry that also told us, you can't leave your house unless you wear a mask, and you can't do this, and this guy can't be on the ballot, even though he seems to be getting a lot of support, but he can't be on the ballot because he's a bad guy.
Yeah, but he can't be on the ballot because he's a threat to democracy.
Right. Which is, so let me read a quote from John Adams.
Please do.
On his thoughts on a democracy. I wasn't trying to make it more dignified. I just had to clear my throat. Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. It is in vain to say that democracy is less vain, less proud, less selfish, less ambitious, or less avaricious than aristocracy or monarchy. It is not true, in fact, and nowhere appears in history. Those passions are the same in all men, under all forms of simple government, and when unchecked, produce the same effects of fraud, violence, and cruelty.
Yeah, and get out your dictionary and look up all of those words, because they are indicative of the worst of human nature.
Yeah.
All of them, and he used that to describe democracy in its final days. And so, what I contend, and I'm agreeing with you, what I contend is that in the progressive era, particularly with the Senate, we turned a republic into a democracy essentially. There are still some checks and balances, but it's infinitely much weaker than what it was in its original form, I believe.
I agree, and I'd say what the progressives want to do is get rid of the Electoral College, which would completely, then we would be a pure democracy, and it would only be a matter of years, probably months, before we went into full tyranny mode.
Yeah.
Full tyranny.
Well, at that point, that's a dissolution of the republic, I believe, because you already see the self-separation going on between states and things like that, where if it came to that point where it was just ungovernable at the nationwide level, then I believe that each of the states would go their own way. I would hope that if something like that happened, that it would just be bloodless, but that's not what history teaches us. No,
in fact, I forget his name. He was the dean of the law school at Liberty University. Matt is his first name. He described, I went up there with my oldest son to a law camp that he was attending. It was really interesting. And he threw out a stat that said basically every, I won't even throw a number, but it was a very small number. On average, a revolution occurs in a nation or group of people every X amount of years, and we are like far past that. And I think it occurred, it just was very subtle over time through that progressive era, maybe slightly before, during, and then certainly after to today. We're seeing a lot of crazy things going on, and I think more and more people are looking around like, hey, why is this happening? I thought we lived in a quote unquote democracy, or what I think they mean is a constitutional republic where the rights of the individual are protected.
Well, and I think you look at a lot of what's going on campuses and things today, and it looks very revolutionary. It looks like video that we might have seen from Cuba back in the 50s and 60s, right, with the communist revolution taking over, and other places where there have been revolutions in our lifetime. A lot of the actions and the crazy talk, that sort of thing, seems to be out there. But that leads me actually into my next question. That was kind of a nice segue that you...
How many more questions? Because I want to double back on one thing that you did ask me before.
Yeah, go right
ahead. So I think you were getting at, and you might not have asked it directly, is the Constitution suitable today, ignoring the whole progressive revamping of certain things? Right. But did the framers foresee enough in their stage of technology? Is it still a suitable document today?
So 2 questions probably. Question number 1 was, did the framers intend for the document that they put in place, although they did give us a way to amend it, but did they intend for it to substantially exist for 200 years plus in its form, or did they intend for it to do as they were doing, which was rewriting it or updating? And you can tell by their language that they are taking some lessons learned, right, from the years under the Articles of Confederation. So that's thing number 1, and then question number 2 is, given all of that, it's now a nation of 330 million people with 50 states. Is that also is it governable in the same way?
So the the ratio of representation for the the state should just be continued to be independent of whether they're directly elected or not. The Senate should be constituted of one or two, let's just say two, senators from each state. But the House, the volume that they had at the time of representative to constituents was slightly different,
much different
than it is today. So if you were to normalize that, somebody did the math. I can't remember what the numbers were, but it was a ridiculous, 1,000 representatives. So I don't know if you need to adjust that ratio or just accept the fact that with that population increase, there also comes a technological increase to where a representative can represent a larger number of folks because we're much more well-connected.
Broader reach, absolutely,
reach.
yeah.
So, not only newspapers and stuff like that, but telephone, we have cars, we can get further faster, we can communicate further and faster, almost immediate. So I don't know if we need to, I don't know if we need to maintain the purity of they represented 1,000 people, that one representative, and we need to keep it that way. Then we'd have a ridiculous number, and I don't think you'd get anything done. You'd have to have a second tier to kind of sort and filter. So I think I'm happy with that ratio that they have, although it's a worthy discussion. How do we shape it as the population continues to increase?
Exactly. Yeah, and I don't pretend to have an answer to that, but I wonder if we were sitting here with a couple of the key framers having this kind of discussion and ask them, do you intend for this to exist the way that you finished it in 200 years? And I believe, because they were well-read, educated, and very very thoughtful people, that they would look back at what they know about the previous 200 years, the previous 400 years, and they might actually say, well, no, absolutely not. We expect it to evolve, perhaps. But I don't know what that means for current actions, to be honest.
Right.
Yeah. So, but it segues over to a question that I hear. I frequent some libertarian circles in my comings and goings, and one of the questions that's out there, it's based on a comment that was made by a famous libertarian, and I'm sorry, but I can't correctly attribute it, but the question is along the lines of has the United States been successful? Has it successfully existed for more than 200 years because of the Constitution or in spite of the Constitution? And the question comes down to a lot of those same questions that you're bringing up about, is the enumerated rights a help or a hindrance as we go forward? And so I'm curious what your take on that is. Has the Constitution been largely successful, or was it too easily sidestepped as the progressive era begins?
That's a good question. We've been successful because we've had, for the past 250 years, the illusion of the intent of the Constitution. It hasn't been consistently applied throughout that time because of the progressive era and because of the dearth of education the past, 100 years. So that progressive era, we keep going back to that. But let me talk a little bit more about this, and this is something you and I it's near and dear to us when it comes to the public education juggernaut. And this is not to disparage anyone that's involved in public education. I'm a fruit of public education.
As am I.
But what you saw in the whole purpose of the public education, propagating it throughout the entire nation, and the administration of it was the intent by the progenitors of it, John Dewey chiefly, was to make each succeeding generation different than the previous, less like your mother and father, each succeeding generation. What they wanted was good little citizens that did exactly what they're told. And they wanted it agnostic to God or even atheistic toward God. And that's what they wanted. That's what they were driving toward. And we went from teaching how to think and learning what to think. And then when you couple that with the Industrial Revolution, with the Industrial Revolution required workers, and workers that were content with going to their job, doing what and getting paid well, getting paid sufficient money to exist and have a family and all that sort of thing. But you get conditioned to sit for 8 hours and listen to what the authority tells you, and you do what the authority tells you.
Make a change when the bell rings.
Yeah. And then now I go to work and I do that. And then it just goes on and on. So they've succeeded in that largely, but there's still a remnant of folks that are hanging on and like, this is not the way it was supposed to be. When you, again, purpose of the system is what it does. When you think now, like when the country was started, we had roads, we had, firefighters. We didn't have any taxes to speak of. I mean, we had some taxes, but very small taxes. We didn't have an income tax, but we had roads. So why do we need these income taxes again? I could go fish. I could open a business and cut hair. I could be a carpenter. I could do this thing. And if I was bad at it, I would lose business. If I went fishing and didn't catch anything, who cares? If I didn't pay somebody to go fish, do I have your permission to go fish, Mr. Game Warden? Why do I need to ask a game warden permission to go fish or hunt?
Yeah, get a license.
Why do I have to get a license to cut hair? Why do I have to get a license to do all these things? So when you look at life today, it is far different than what started. Well, how did we get there? Or how do we get here from there? That's my question. We're here now, and we have to ask permission to do everything, even now, to not get things done to us, like a shot that I don't want, that's illegal to give me. I have to ask permission for that, and in the past, it was not the case at all. So I kind of went on a rant there, but I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, I think you did answer the question. It's unknown. That's the reason that it's questioned. Are we here because of the Constitution or in spite of the Constitution?
I think because, but it's just barely hanging in there though.
Well, it may be a two-parter, also a two-part answer that, up to the beginning of the Progressive era, we were here because of the Constitution, and since then it's been sort of people hanging on to the memory of freedoms past.
Right.
That has caused it to stay the way it is, but slowly that erodes away, right? If you don't have that bulwark, if you don't have that seawall built up against the progressive waves kind of smashing against your freedom.
Right.